Welcome to the Restoring Our City podcast. We're on with another episode. I'm joined with my fellow co-hosts, Bijoy Samuel and Jeswin Thomas. What's up, guys?
What's up?
What up? What up?
Not much. But you know what? Every time I turn on the news, we're still in January 2022, but it feels like every time you turn on the news, there's another celebrity that died. And it's kind of crazy because what I've been seeing lately is, as a lot of people probably know, Bob Saget died about a week ago. And I don't know, it kind of hit me in a weird way. I don't know how you guys feel about Bob Saget, but that one kind of hit me a little bit.
It's like Betty White passed away like 2 weeks ago. So they always
New
say
Year's
that
Eve.
like,
New Year's
Eve. Yeah. So these are like, she's pretty iconic, but they always say that those kinds of deaths happen in three, so when Betty White, I don't know if you guys heard that, like
I've heard that before.
It's kind of a creepy thing to think about, but they say that's the case. But yeah, when Betty White passed away, it was like, oh man, that's pretty iconic. But yeah, Bob Saget, that's
Bob
a big
Saget,
deal.
TV, America's Dad, apparently.
Yeah. What's really funny is if you watch him do stand-up or see any of his roasts, you're like, man, your character on Full House and you in person are so different.
You're a really good actor.
Yes. He's like squeaky clean Danny Tanner.
Yeah,
no, you're not in real life. But it's kind of sad. And not to joke around about somebody dying. Obviously, it's really sad for his family. It's a tragic situation. However, just got me thinking about this topic of celebrity and just even our responses to celebrities in this culture of celebrities. So has there been a celebrity death that's impacted you guys that you kind of took a step back and are like, oh man, wow, I didn't realize I'd feel like this?
Yeah, it was really weird, but it's almost a year ago, or possibly a little bit more that Kobe passed away. And I remember it was really funny. We were all at church and we're in the middle of this sort of general body meeting, but a lot less heated than we all might be used to. And we're sitting there and all of a sudden someone's, notification pops up that Kobe passed away. And you just start seeing the reactions across the room. And initially it's like, oh, this is a joke. But later on, you're like, oh my gosh, this is surreal. And it does hit you because, I obviously I don't know who Kobe is. I've never met him before in my life. In fact, I probably disliked him more when he was playing, called him a ball hog. But the second he passed, I'm like, wow, this impacted me in a very like real and like weird way.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I was gonna say Kobe for sure, and then man, this was like I don't even know how many years ago, but Paul Walker. Remember Paul Walker from? I loved that whole series. I mean, I thought it was incredibly cheesy series, but I really liked him for some reason in a lot of his movies. And I whenever a celebrity passes away or an athlete passes away, I find myself spending a lot of time watching old interviews with all of them, or like reading what other people say about them on Instagram or Twitter. Like you just get lost into this thing of like, what's everyone's like reaction to it, right? Like in the world, and what are they saying about this person? I think it was the same thing with Bob Saget too. Like I've never really, I know we started kind of lighthearted on this, but it is sad, right? Like it's unexpected and we don't know the circumstances behind it, but he was someone that I think a lot of us in the 90s ish probably grew up with, and watched those things on TGIF and maybe some of us caught some of the new Netflix ones. But yeah, it's just really sad to kind of see someone that we think is iconic. But it's funny because I've never met him before in my life. And only after he passed did I started watching more of his interviews.
I think that's so interesting because you both brought up some points that I want to dive into. First of all, we've never met these people. I've never met Bob Saget at backstage behind a show or even in passing, but it's one of those things. Like Kobe, I saw from the 300 level of the United Center looking down. I saw him from far away, but man, we've never met these people. But Joy, you mentioned something. It's like we've grown up with them. Like there's this frequency. Do you feel like that kind of plays into our emotional attachment with these people?
Yeah, I do. I think the fact that we grew up with them, but like, in a case like Kobe, right? Like we were young and we're watching him play ball, right? We're watching these games, we're watching his, post-game interviews and all these kinds of things. And so you just start to like, and then you're watching the news and the scandals and all these different things that come out of it, and you just start to feel like if I was in a room with him and I met him for the first time, I feel like I would know a lot about him, like
Yeah.
in some level. But yeah, I think there is something about you're so ingrained, like from a distance, right? Like there's a difference there, but we're from a distance, we're looking into someone's life that's being documented like for many, many years. It's hard not to feel like you're a part of that, or
Part of
that
that
there's
relationship.
some, yeah, like there's some connection there, even though there really isn't a connection there.
No, that's interesting. It's like I I I've watched Kobe's entire career from since he was 18 to, unfortunately his passing, and just seeing the stuff that he did after basketball with his daughter and things like that. It's been pretty crazy. Um and Justin, you kind of mentioned that like we don't meet these people, but we still feel a certain kind of way, right? I don't know if that speaks to our relationships in real life, quote unquote. It's like the frequency and the things like that we see people with, and we have this emotional attachment with them. But yeah, celebrities are weird, right? It's kind of strange that we feel like we kind of know them, but they don't know us. It's a very one-sided type of relationship, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's more interesting to me is just considering, for example, people like Kobe. I think it's almost like we feel like we know them, but at the same time, the things we know about them seem to be true, right? Like we think he's a workaholic. We think he's, got that Mamba mentality, if you will. And everyone seems to affirm that. But then I was actually, while we're talking about celebrity deaths, I was reflecting on Robin Williams passing, right? And you have this guy that is out there, and you must think, man, this guy's got to be like the happy go lucky dude, just considering all his movies and the way that he spread joy. But then you take a step back and you see the circumstances of his death, with suicide and just the depression, and you're like, wow, I thought I knew this person, but I clearly didn't. And so sometimes when you look at those kind of things, it kind of strikes you. It's like, hey, maybe what I think about this person is getting affirmed by the reactions to how they're passing. And maybe sometimes, the flip is actually true too, where it's maybe I didn't know who this person was at all.
Are those true relationships? Can like a one-sided fan celebrity be a true relationship? Is there any weight in that?
I think that you can be inspired by somebody, like there's a difference there, right? Like there's a difference between knowing someone on kind of a personal level where it's not just what's out there, but it's like you get to know someone in a different context. And then there's like just watching someone from the peripheral, which I think happens with a lot of celebrities, and then picking and choosing certain things that we feel like we're motivated by or inspired by, right? Like that's with a lot of athletes. Like if it's Kobe's work ethic, if it's Robin Williams' sense of humor, if it's, like whatever that may be, right? Growing up with Bob Saget as like the TV dad, there's that squeaky clean, just the way he is. But yeah, I think there's a part of us where we're drawn to like celebrities where we're kind of like we get inspired by them a little bit, but then also I think there's also a level of just like we want their life sometimes, right? Like you
Ooh,
think about
yeah.
being a basketball player, making a lot of money and just traveling and going to games and the celebrity status, and we're like, man, like I wish I could do that.
Yeah. I guess there's like a difference between being a fan and then a stan, right? Like from like Eminem's song, just that guy who goes off the deep end. Um, but yeah, I think that's a really great way to look at it too, because we can be inspired by people in our own community, right? Like you see somebody doing something really, really great, and you want to emulate them or even kind of absorb some of those traits. I think those are healthy things that we can almost take away from this celebrity type of relationship. You even said something, Jeswin, earlier that made me kind of double take too, because like Kobe Bryant's a great example. When we grew up in Chicago, and I think the early Kobe years, a lot of Jordan Kobe comparisons, and it was just drive us insane. And I was like, we hated Kobe, but then there's like this point in his career, we're like, oh my gosh, this guy is really like Michael Jordan. And you had this respect for him. But then you also said once he died, our perceptions changed completely, right? What is it about, I guess, death that does that to us? Maybe even outside of just celebrity, but how does death change our perception of people in general?
It's interesting. How yeah, that's a great question. And even with death in general, I think sometimes we're drawn to just think about all the good things about a person, right? Like actively, you never want to think of someone that passed away in a bad light. I don't know if it's just something internal to us, but even with all these celebrities and all their deaths, I think one of the most interesting things to even ponder is, as humans, we might think of just the good, or try to just remember the good and think of the dead in a certain light. But I think, just from like even like just taking it to like a macro level with God, right? Like I think God sees the good, bad, ugly all across the board. And it's more interesting to me to consider, hey man, one day, like when I die, how is God gonna see me, right? Like I could care in some senses less about how y'all see me if I passed away. But what really matters is that endpoint right there, right? Like you may only think about the good, but man, what does God see everything? What does he think about me?
That's a weird concept to think that, usually when people pass away, you think about all the great things they did, right? Like, I don't know if I want all the bad parts. Like, like I'm sitting
Awkward
at my
funeral.
right.
It's
What
like,
an awkward
well, let's
funeral.
look at this list of
Here's a
Bijoy.
slideshow of all of his sin, just in case anyone needed to balance out the good things that you were thinking about, right? Like,
Yeah, and then we might get a clearer picture of that person, or we might just get the rosy picture of that person, right? But it's interesting as you guys were starting to talk about this. One celebrity death that kind of hit me in a strange way was Norm Macdonald. If you guys remember, Norm
Mhm.
Macdonald is a
Mhm.
comedian. He was notoriously famous for being on Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live back in the day. He's kind of a quirky comedian, but he died last year, and he actually had cancer for I think 12 years, but nobody knew that he had cancer.
Mm.
And so he passed away, and a lot of his good friends, when he did pass away, that's when they found out he had cancer. And then I actually went down the rabbit hole, like you were talking about, Bijoy. I just went down the rabbit hole of the interviews because he was one of my favorite comedians. I'd listen to his jokes. They were just absurd, weird stuff, sometimes not appropriate, but really random and strange. But in some of these interviews, he would talk about death, and he would actually talk to the interviewer and say, What do you think about, what kind of relationships do you have with people? Like, what if they were dying? Would you even know? He asked that to an interviewer who was actually interviewing him, but it was so strange. And then, you think about it, 2020, hindsight is 2020, and you look back at that interview, he's really talking about himself. You kind of get a different glimpse of people after they pass away, unfortunately.
Yeah, and what's really funny is you talked about Norm Macdonald and battling cancer, and the first thing that came to my mind is Chadwick Boseman, right? Where you have this literally budding iconic, right? It's so funny to see, or actually kind of sad but bittersweet to think about. He had such a short career, but it was truly iconic from the roles that he played. But it seemed that he was just trying to live that life with such purpose. And then you think about it, just like you said, Job, and in light of his cancer, you start thinking about that period in a totally different way, and you just see the work that he put in a totally different light, and it's even more amazing to consider.
we always say that, like, after you pass on, right? Nobody cares at that point,
Hmm.
like how much money you made or any of those things or how many houses you had. It's just the impact that you've made. And I feel like even with these celebrities, like when Kobe passed away, when Chadwick Boseman, all these guys, and Bob Saget, no one's like, oh my gosh, he made so much money during his time or whatever, or I have no idea how many houses or anything that he has. Like, it was never about any of that. Like, so even as a celebrity, even as like just regular people like us, at the end of the day, when life is over, right? Like, it all gets boiled down to the kind of the same thing now. It's like, how are people remembering the impact that we made, right? Whether it's in the world or to someone particularly in our life, but it's not about any of the other things that we tend to chase after.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, adding on to that concept of impact, not to throw around another cliche term, but influencers, right? I think these people had influence in our lives. So, Jobin, kind of going back to that question, is that relationship sort of genuine? Is it true? I don't exactly know how to answer that question, but it's undeniable that these people had influence in our lives in one way, shape, or form. And I can't help but think of even Christian celebrities, quote unquote, that have had influence in my own life. There's zero question that I admire them for their thoughts. I admire them for the way that they help me to see the world through the lens of the gospel. But at the end of the day, I still don't know them, right? And so when we see some of them fall, it kind of brings us again back to reality. But the influence that they have is undeniable.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty important point because just even talking about this topic and why is it important? Why does this connect to community? I think it's because collectively we feel something. And is it superficial because it's a celebrity and we don't really know them? No, because I think you guys brought up really good points. There's some lessons we can learn from them, and we can really be inspired to do some really good things. And I think it also challenges us finally to leave a legacy. What kind of impact are we making? But then there's some dangers too, right? We can kind of take this, celebrity worship a little too far, right? And I think that's kind of the scary kind of time that we're living in right now because of all these influencers, and popularity and fame is so, I don't know, desired by, I don't want to just say the younger generation, by just people everywhere. That could be a pitfall, right? For a lot of people.
Yeah, we're designed to worship, right? So if it's not going to be God, then we're going to find people to do that. And I think, the Christian community is no different. Like you guys were talking about, if we elevate preachers and we elevate celebrities, we elevate musicians, all the same. And so then when we hear about their humanness comes to light, we're totally destroyed by it, because it's like we've elevated them so much.
Yeah, just to push back a little bit, I'm thinking to even verses and examples we see from the Bible, including Paul, which said, hey, follow my example, right? Like follow what I am doing, not just what I'm saying. And I think that kind of puts a little bit more pressure on those within the Christian community, right? Like I think that is the attitude that we should still have in some ways, like still follow my example, but that elevates us to really make sure, hey, am I being as accountable as I can be, right? Do I have people that are vulnerably calling me out, right? Am I truly becoming more and more like Christ? Because if I am, I think people do need to see those examples. And I think those examples ought to be followed, right? Because we can't go at it alone. But at the same time, we can't negate, just to your point too, Bijoy, like the humanness, right? Like we as in some senses, we can't put people in pedestals where God ought to be. And at the same time, we also shouldn't completely humanize them to a point where we have no expectations either. It's somewhere in between.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to kind of wrap this up too, because it's not all just bad, right? Especially if someone is rising to a level of fame and influence, especially in the Christian stratosphere. I think there's a good thing in that, right? It can really proclaim the gospel into places that we can't do locally. So I think there's some positive attributes to that. But I think this is a really great conversation because, who knows who's next? It's too early in 2022. That's so morbid. But
wow. Yeah, we're gonna have to redo that ending. Just kidding.
When every single week, Lord right?
You're right. No, I feel like there's positives and concerns to take out of celebrities and just the culture surrounding it. But I think it's interesting to kind of mourn for somebody you don't know. I think we just wrapped up virtual church and it's like, hey, can we have relationships with people we just see on a screen? Well, can we have relationships with famous people that we don't even know and are inspired by, just don't take it to some crazy level and stalk their house and peep in their windows and stuff. Guys, I think this is a really interesting conversation. I'd love to hear from the listeners too, to just say, hey, well, who celebrity death impacted you the most? And is there a lesson that you've learned from an actual famous person or a legacy that really inspired you? I'd be curious to see if that's shaped your community in your local kind of group of friends and family. So interesting to see that. So thank you guys for jumping on and talking about this. And hopefully we'll not have anyone die for the rest of the year.
Yeah, let's pray for it, right? All celebrities stay alive for the next
Stay
couple
alive.
of
Everyone
weeks.
stay alive. All right, guys. Talk to you later.
All right, have a good one.
Later, guys.
Bye.